On Dravaris, 9. Even names didn't survive the wind. The air was sharp with copper grit and ash, so dry it peeled skin and rusted steel in the same breath. Heat shimmered from the ground like a mirage, warping the hard edges of the colony's bones. Steel walkways, scorched machinery, chain-linked fences patched with crystal wire. Nothing was new. Nothing was soft. Here, everything cracked or corroded, people included. She lay against the base of a livestock enclosure, half submerged in a pit of churned sludge and slag runoff, unmoving. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped tightly around them as if holding herself in. Mud clung to her like a second skin, dried in ridged flakes across her back and caked thick behind her knees. The rags on her body barely counted as clothing, once white, now stained beyond memory. Her hair, long, white, once luminous, hung in knotted ropes down her back, streaked with filth. Her skin beneath the dirt was green, not sickly but smooth and luminous when clean, a rare shade in the galaxy. But it had been so long since she'd seen it reflected in anything but dirty puddles that she no longer believed it mattered. People passed her. They didn't stop. They never did. A few paused just long enough to sneer or spit. She's still breathing? Probably just another stray. Let her rot. Damn waste of protein. Should have culled her with a rest. They called her it rat garbage. On Dravaris, 9. Those words weren't slurs. They were policy. She didn't flinch. Didn't lift her head. Didn't blink. Stillness was a kind of survival. The more she looked like waste, the less likely someone would decide to claim her. Once, a voice had called her Leah. It might have been her mother's. Or maybe she'd made it up just to feel less hollow. Above her, a drone hummed lazily in a circular pattern, its red sensor light scanning for movement. It paused when it reached her, hovered. Then, finding no vital signs strong enough to register, it drifted on, trailing a faint smell of ozone. She might have passed out, or maybe she was only fading. On Dravaris, 9, there was no ceremony for dying. You simply stopped being seen. Then came footsteps. Heavy, measured. They stopped right in front of her. She didn't look up. She'd learned the hard way that looking up led to chains. Or collars. Or worse, offers disguised as mercy. The silence held. She waited for the kick. It didn't come. Instead, the weight shifted beside her. A knee bent. The sound of a coat unfastening. Something thick and dry, canvas, she thought, settled gently around her shoulders. It smelled of machine oil and desert wind. The warmth startled her more than a blow would have. She dared to raise her eyes. The man crouching beside her was human. Tall, weathered. Streaks of gray threaded through short brown hair, and a faded scar curved beneath his jaw like a story no one dared ask about. His boots were battered. His gloves oil-stained. His expression was unreadable. He didn't leer. He didn't speak yet. He just looked at her, not through her, not at her like one might regard an asset, but with something else, something dangerously close to recognition. Finally, he said in a low, calm voice, "Come with me." She stared at him. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to say no, or why, or what do you want from me? But something in his voice didn't carry threat or ownership. It carried the weight of a man used to being ignored and still choosing to speak. Behind him, a group of off-shift miners had gathered, watching the scene with open disgust. "Hey, Vale," one of them called out. "You adopting garbage now?" The man didn't turn. Another voice laughed, crueler. "That thing probably hasn't bathed since rotation 1. You'll never get that stink out of your shack." Still, the man didn't answer. He held out a hand. She looked at it, trembling. Her body screamed in protest as she tried to rise. Her legs didn't want to work. The crusted mud pulled at her joints like chains. But he didn't rush her. He waited, hands steady in the air like an anchor in a storm. She reached for it. The moment their fingers touched, she expected pain. Pressure. The yank of authority. Instead, he supported her slowly, gently, pulling her up as if afraid she might break. Her knees buckled. She leaned against him out of reflex, breath catching in her throat. Her weight sagged into his side, and she braced for him to recoil. He didn't, even when the filth on her skin smeared onto his shirt. even when the scent of days without food or shelter clung to her like a warning. He steadied her. They walked. No one followed. No one stopped them. The crowd watched with a mix of scorn and boredom, as though witnessing a fool take home a wounded animal not worth saving. She couldn't ask where they were going. She couldn't believe it mattered. In her mind, cages had always come in different shapes. Maybe this one wore a human face. Maybe that coat on her shoulders was just another kind of trap. But she walked with him anyway, because his hand hadn't closed like the others, because his voice hadn't demanded, only invited, because something deep inside her, something small and half-buried, still wanted to believe that not all hands hurt. Above them, the drone from earlier paused mid-flight. Its red sensor light flickered, just once, as if uncertain, or curious, then moved on. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, the girl with no name stepped away from the mud. Not alone. Corin Vale's shelter sat on the edge of the colony, far enough from the mining pits to avoid the worst of the noise, but close enough to feel the tremors when the drills punched too deep. The place was modest, gray walls, a patchy solar array, half-repaired machines leaning against the outside like tired animals. But it was quiet and private. When they arrived, he said nothing. Just opened the door and stepped aside to let her in first. Inside, the temperature held steady, controlled by an old thermal loop humming softly behind the walls. The air didn't bite like outside. No ash, no wind. Just the faint scent of oil, metal, and something else, basil, maybe from a long-dead hydroponic experiment. She hesitated in the doorway, waiting for a command that didn't come. He gestured down the narrow hallway, toward the only door with a dull green light above it. "Bathroom's there," he said quietly. "There's hot water. Take as long as you need." Then he placed a clean towel and a bundle of clothes on a bench by the wall. The fabric was soft, worn but washed, folded with care. She stared at it like it might dissolve. "I won't come in," he added. "Just knock if you need anything." And then he left. She stood there for a long time, just breathing, waiting for the trick, the catch, waiting for the part where kindness morphed into control. But nothing happened, so she stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind her, sealing the room. For a moment, she simply stood still, letting the silence wrap around her like a blanket. Her reflection stared back from the tarnished mirror, barely visible beneath the grime on her face. Mud, dry blood, ash. Her white hair hung like ropes. Her skin was a dull green-gray, cracked with dryness and exhaustion. The sink had soap, real soap. She didn't remember the last time she'd touched anything that clean. Then she turned the shower on. When the first rush of hot water hit her back, she cried out. Not from pain, not from fear, from the shock of it, the luxury of it. Water. Hot. Endless. Pouring over her shoulders, between her shoulder blades, washing down her legs and across her feet, where the mud came off in black streaks. She scrubbed until her skin burned, until the water ran clear, until the memory of hands dragging her through dirt and chains slipping over her wrists washed down the drain. She touched her own face and flinched, not because of pain, but because it felt like someone else's skin. Smooth, warm, real. When she finally turned off the water, steam hung thick in the room. Her hair fell like silk down her back, ghost white and glistening. The reflection in the mirror still scared her, but less than before. She dried herself carefully, like someone assembling something delicate. Then she reached for the clothes. Soft fabric, a neutral gray shirt, and dark pants that clung gently to her body. No collar, no markings, nothing that screamed owned. She almost couldn't breathe. "Please," she whispered to no one. "Don't say I'm beautiful." That's always how it starts. Her hand trembled as she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Corin was sitting at the small table, fiddling with a broken coil transmitter. The door hiss caught his attention, and he looked up casually, then froze. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. The woman standing there wasn't the creature he'd pulled from the mud, not the hunched, shivering thing wrapped in filth. She stood tall now, still cautious, still fragile, but no longer buried. Her green skin, now clean, glowed with a faint natural luminescence, the color of fresh jade warmed by sun. Her long white hair flowed like melted light over her shoulders. And her eyes, those golden eyes, were no longer hollow. They watched him, guarded, vulnerable, alive. She hugged her arms around herself, unsure. "Don't stare," she said softly. "I know what people see." "I'm not staring," Corin said. But he was. He couldn't help it. She was, damn it, there was no other word, extraordinary. Not beautiful in the way humans measured it. She was otherworldly, designed by a cruel god for reverence and suffering alike. Every line of her body spoke of something elegant, distant, unapproachable. And yet she stood there, barefoot and trembling, wrapped in borrowed clothes, afraid of what he'd say. "I don't care what you look like," Corin said finally, his voice lower now. Steadier. "I didn't bring you here to be looked at. I brought you here to be safe." She blinked, startled, as if no one had ever said those words to her before. He rose, careful not to move too fast, and gestured to the chair across from his. "There's food. Not fancy, but it's warm." She hesitated, then walked over slowly, barefoot steps barely making a sound. She sat, her hands resting on her lap, eyes flicking between the steaming bowl in front of her and the man across the table. The scent of real broth rose from the bowl, something with root vegetables, thickened with protein grain. Her stomach growled, loud and abrupt. She flinched. Corin said nothing, just handed her a spoon. Her fingers trembled as she gripped it. She brought the first bite to her mouth too fast, half desperate, and choked. She coughed, eyes watering. He handed her water, calmly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "I haven't eaten real food," she whispered, voice raw. "Not in a long time." He nodded. They ate in silence. And when she finished, her breathing steadied. Her shoulders dropped just slightly. Not trust, not yet, but a sliver of something gentler. Corin cleared the bowls. Didn't ask questions. Didn't push. He pointed toward a closed door down the hall. "There's a bed in there. You can take it." She stared. "You don't want anything?" "No, I don't have anything to trade." "I know." She hesitated again, then slowly stood. Her golden eyes lingered on him for a long moment, measuring, waiting for the lie to surface. It didn't. She stepped toward the door, but paused halfway. "Why did you help me?" He looked up from his hands, quiet for a beat too long. "Because no one else did," he said, then turned back to his tools. She watched him for a moment more, and then she slipped into the room, closed the door, and, for the first time in what felt like years, lay down without fear. Corin sat alone in the fading light, staring at the place where she had stood. He wasn't sure what shook him more, her beauty, or the way she looked at him. Like kindness was a language she hadn't heard in years. The dreams came first. Soft, shivering images that didn't hold shape, just impressions. Chains clicking, hands pulling her hair, a voice too low and cold to remember the words. Then the sound of a latch turning behind her. She woke with a gasp, lungs tight, arms tangled in the blanket. For a second, she didn't know where she was. Her instinct screamed, run, hide, vanish. But then the details returned, slow and cautious. The room was dim, lit only by a wall panel pulsing with gentle orange light. The air was still warm, still clean. No shouting, no footsteps, just the faint hum of the building's old thermal system, humming like a distant heartbeat. She was alone, and not in a cage. Her breath slowed. Sitting up, she touched the corner of the blanket with her fingertips. It was smooth, not silk, nothing luxurious, but not government-issued rags either. Not stained, not blood-slicked, just simple fabric, soft enough to remember. Her feet met the floor, cold but not cruel. The clothes still fit. She hadn't been stripped in her sleep. She hadn't been moved. Nothing had changed, except the feeling. The trembling in her spine had dulled overnight. Not gone, but bearable. She moved down the hallway silently, unsure of what she'd find on the other side. Corin was at the same table as last night, though now it was covered in parts. Machines, coils, servos, circuit boards in various states of decay. A half-assembled mining drone sat disemboweled in front of him, wires like intestines spilling from its shell. His hands were steady, calloused, working with precision. He didn't look up when she entered. just said, "Morning." She hesitated in the doorway. No one had ever said, "Good morning" to her before. The words felt strange in her ears, like a phrase from another lifetime. "Morning," she echoed, voice small. He gestured with a nod toward the kitchen unit. "I made tea. Still hot." She didn't move right away, just watched him for a moment. His focus didn't shift. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand eye contact. No traps. Eventually, she moved to the small counter and lifted the metal cup that waited for her. The scent surprised her. Herbs. Real ones, dried and bitter. Not nutritional paste or hydration packets, but something brewed with care. She sipped. It burned her tongue, just slightly, but the heat settled in her stomach like an anchor. A chair sat opposite Corin. She stood behind it, unsure, until he finally glanced up and said, "You can sit." So she did. For a while, it didn't speak. Just the sound of him working, her sipping slowly, the drone's loose casing creaking with age. It wasn't silence like before, empty, dangerous silence. This one had shape, like stone warmed by the sun. She watched his hands. He had a mechanic's movements. Intentional, unhurried, precise. The scar beneath his jaw flexed slightly every time he focused harder. "You fix things," she said, surprising herself at the question. He nodded. "Machines don't lie." She tilted her head. "People do." "Yeah. Do you?" He looked at her now. Steady. Calm. "No." That answer sat between them a moment. "I used to be owned by a man who said the same," she said quietly, tracing the rim of her cup. "But he lied more sweetly than anyone I'd ever met." Corin didn't answer right away. He returned to his work, but not dismissively, more like someone waiting for the right words. "Then I'll avoid sweetness," he said eventually. She huffed a quiet breath, almost a laugh. "I don't remember what I was before they bought me," she said, her voice quieter now. "I think I had a name. Something with an L. Leah, maybe." She wasn't sure why she said that. She hadn't spoken her name in years. Maybe not since childhood. Corin didn't react. No pity. No hollow comforts. Just not at once. "Leah suits you." She blinked. "Suits me." "Yeah. How would you know? I've met people who call themselves warriors and wouldn't last a week outside the domes. Names are just sounds. It's how you wear them that matters." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything at all. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the drone parts. What happened to it? Overheated. Stripped out its guidance loop. She narrowed her eyes. "Can I see?" Corin arched a brow, surprised. "You know how?" "No, but I remember things fast." That was true. She'd been conditioned to retain languages, patterns, vocal cues. Her memory was sharp. It had to be slaves who forgot orders were reconditioned, or worse. He handed her a small screwdriver without a word. She took it. Her hands trembled slightly at first, but steadied as she turned the screws with slow, careful precision. The panel clicked free. Inside, layered components, heat-scored wires, microchips corroded from exposure. She didn't know what she was doing, but she didn't stop. Corin watched her from the corner of his eye. Quiet, but not disinterested. "You've got good instincts," he murmured. "I had to," she replied. "Instinct kept me alive. Still does." Their eyes met again, and this time something passed between them. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition. They weren't the same, but they were both survivors. When her hands brushed his by accident, she flinched only slightly. Enough that he pulled back, giving her space. No judgment. No offense. She cleared her throat. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. Corin leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Because I couldn't leave you there." "That's not a reason." "It is to me." She didn't believe him. Not completely. But she didn't press. Something told her that pushing him would only close doors. Instead, she studied his face. "You fought in the border wars, didn't you?" she said. He blinked. "How do you know?" "I've seen men with that scar before. From old drop harnesses. Military issue." He said nothing. She continued. "Most men I met from that war ended up drunk or dead. You're neither." Corin gave her a tired half-smile. "Give it time." And for a moment, they both smiled. Not wide. Not foolish. Just a flicker. It vanished quickly, but had been real. That night, she slept again in the small room. The blanket no longer felt like a disguise. The bed, while still unfamiliar, no longer carried the threat of betrayal. Her body remained tense, but less so. Her heartbeat settled faster. Her breath came easier. She still didn't trust him, but she didn't fear him either. And in the dark, staring at the cracked ceiling above her, she allowed one dangerous thought to slip through. Maybe she had survived long enough for something else to begin. She didn't know what that would look like. She didn't believe in hope, but she was starting to believe in Corin Vale's silence. And that was almost the same thing. It rained that morning, not the soft kind of rain that cleaned streets or refreshed air. On Dravaris 9, rain came in metallic sheets, laced with ash and static, rolling off the dome like ghosts tapping on glass. Outside, the sky boiled a sick gray-orange, as if the planet were trying to peel itself apart from the inside out. Inside the shelter, it was quiet, warmer than usual. Aurenia sat in the corner of the main room, cross-legged, barefoot, arms draped loosely over her knees. She watched the droplets snake down the reinforced window, tracing the rivets as if they might spell something. An answer, maybe. A message from a world she'd never return to. Corin sat across the room, hunched over his workbench, tinkering with a fried transducer coil. He hadn't said much that morning, but that was normal. He didn't fill space with noise. He respected silence the way others respected weapons, cautiously, reverently. She watched him in the reflection of the glass. Calm, focused, unthreatening, but still a mystery. She turned from the window. I think it's time I told you who I am. Corin paused, not surprised, just waiting. She shifted, folding her hands in her lap. Her voice was soft, but steady. My name is Aurenia Velsurian. I was born on Elanthus Prime, in the second sky temple of the Velarial caste. He didn't react, not visibly, but something in his posture changed, like the tension in a wire, pulled tight but not yet snapping. She continued, gaze steady. The Velarial are bred for symmetry, for grace, for beauty so precise it borders on unnatural. On my world, to be born flawless is not a gift. It's a responsibility, or a curse, depending on how you look at it. She ran a hand through her hair, letting it fall like white silk over her shoulder. I was considered a living jewel. That was the phrase they used. It sounds poetic, but what it meant was that I stopped being a child the moment I could stand straight and smile on command. I was trained to walk without sound, to speak only when spoken to dance without joy and sing without breath. Corin didn't interrupt. His eyes, for once, weren't on his tools. They dressed me in gold-veined robes, painted my eyelids with crystal dust. They taught me how to move like water and how to freeze like art. Men bowed, women envied, and none of them saw me. Her voice cracked, just once, but she kept speaking. I was passed between temples and patrons, always under the guise of honor. First as a ceremonial envoy, then as a decorative companion. Eventually, as a private acquisition. She looked down at her hands. Pale green, slender, scarred. One day, I was told I was being given to an off-world diplomat, a high-ranking negotiator from the Imperial Border Corps. I was to be his symbol of alliance, a political offering. Her lips curled, but there was no humor in it. He called me exotic, said I would be safer away from the jealousies of the temple. Safer with him. What he meant was that no one would come looking. Corin exhaled slowly, but didn't speak. I lasted 3 months, she said. Then he sold me again. This time not as a representative, as property. That was the first time I heard the word slave used with my name. She let that word hang in the air, heavy and sharp. I was too valuable to work the mines, too rare to break. So I was moved from hand to hand, each owner more careless than the last. Eventually, I ended up here, sold to a colony supervisor as a status token. A luxury. Aurenia looked up now, her golden eyes catching the light. But beauty is dangerous, even when it's all you have. The men wanted too much. The women wanted me gone. One day, the supervisor's wife accused me of seducing her husband. I hadn't even looked at him, but it didn't matter. She ordered me thrown out. Not sold, not reassigned, just discarded. Her voice turned quieter now. They dumped me in the animal pens. Said if anyone wanted me, they could take me. She paused. You know the rest. Corin leaned back slightly, jaw clenched. His knuckles were white around the small tool in his hand. I didn't know, he said. Not all of it, but I knew the look. She tilted her head. What look? The one people get when they've been used so long. They forget what it feels like to be touched without purpose. Her breath caught. He set the tool down, slowly. I've seen it before, he said. In soldiers. In survivors. In mirrors. She stared at him. Your turn. He didn't hesitate this time. My name's Corin Vale. Born on Loras Station, Terran Orbital Colony. My parents were maintenance techs. Raised me between pressurized corridors and leaking pipe welds. He rubbed his jaw, fingers brushing the old scar across his chin. I joined a unified combat corps at 17. Thought I'd be designing tech. Turned out, they needed engineers who didn't mind bleeding. He gave a dry laugh. I was deployed to Vexa 3 during the 4th border expansion. My unit was assigned to patch and rebuild forward shelters while command pushed through enemy-controlled terrain. First week there, we lost 2 convoys to thermal bombs. The heat waves cooked the insulation. I tried to rebuild a med bay from burnt scrap and shattered glass. His voice turned rough. 3 of my people died because I couldn't finish in time. Arena said nothing, just listened. They gave me a commendation. Said I saved 12 lives. I remember the 12, but I see the 3 in every dream. He looked up, eyes meeting hers. After the war ended, I turned down my reassignment. Took what credits I had, bought passage to Dravaris 9. Figured if I could fix enough broken machines, maybe I'd forget the broken people. You haven't, she said gently. No. A silence passed. Deep, unsettling, then honest. I didn't bring you here to fix you, he said. I'm not that arrogant. I know. I just couldn't leave you in that mud. She swallowed. And I didn't expect to survive. Corin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. So what now? I don't know, she whispered. I don't even know what I am anymore. You're not property. No, but I'm not free either. Not inside. He nodded. That takes time. And trust, she added quietly. He didn't argue. Then, slowly she stood. Moved across the room. She stopped in front of him. Not too close. Not too far. Thank you, she said. He met her eyes. For what? For not trying to own me. You're not something to be owned. Arena's voice shook when she asked. Then what am I? His answer was soft. You're a person who deserves to decide that for herself. And with that, something inside her, something buried so deep it had forgotten the taste of hope, uncoiled just slightly. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she belonged to someone else's story. She felt like she was beginning to reclaim her own. And for now, in this small room on a broken world, that was enough. The shelter was quiet again, but something had shifted in the air. Arena felt it the moment she woke. Not in the room's temperature or the light filtering through the window, but in her chest. The weight she'd carried for so long, the silence, the dread, the readiness to flinch, had softened just enough to breathe without bracing. She rose and dressed slowly. No one rushed her. No one shouted orders. The fabric against her skin felt like a choice, not a costume. In the kitchen, Corin was already up. He stood at the open panel of the power converter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, fingers black with oil. A light frown lined his brow as he adjusted the alignment node with a flick of his wrench. He didn't look up when she entered, but she knew he'd registered her presence. He always did. Good morning, she said, voice quiet but clear. He grunted in reply, a neutral, wordless sound that somehow still managed to feel like an acknowledgement. She moved past him and poured herself a cup of tea. The warmth in her hands felt grounding. Familiar now. She leaned against the wall, watching him work. You always fix things first thing in the morning. Corin glanced at her, then back at the panel. Keeps my hands busy. She smiled faintly. Keeps your mind still. Something like that. Arena walked to the table and sat, wrapping her fingers around the mug. She didn't speak for a while, just watched him. There was something calming about the rhythm of his movements. Deliberate. Practical. Honest. I used to start every morning with protocol chants, she said suddenly. Balance the breath. Still the eyes. Align the voice. That kind of thing. Corin didn't interrupt. They said it trained discipline. I think it just trained obedience. He finished the alignment and set the wrench down with a clink. You want to learn how to fix things instead? She tilted her head, surprised. You teach me? He shrugged. Sure, if you're interested. Aurenia looked down at her hands. Long, graceful fingers that had once been trained to pour tea in precise arcs and to fold ceremonial cloth without creasing it. I've only ever been taught how to please, she said, not how to build. Corin's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe it's time you learned something that doesn't cost you pieces of yourself. The silence after that was thick, but not uncomfortable. She nodded slowly. I'd like that. Later, when the rain let up, they stepped outside together. The air was still sharp with ozone and dust, but the sky had cleared to a dull steel gray. The colony's edge shimmered in the distance, where solar collectors reflected the light like cracked mirrors. Corin led her to the storage shed near the generator. Inside, it smelled of old rubber, rust, and coolant. He handed her a simple toolkit, small wrenches, a multi-tip driver, a panel tester. You ever dismantled a coolant cap? He asked. No. Want to try? She smiled. You really believe I can? I believe anyone who survived what you have can handle a bolt. That made her laugh. Not loud, but real. He showed her how to loosen the outer casing, how to keep pressure from venting too fast. She listened carefully, mimicking his gestures, asking questions when she needed to. By the time they finished, she was dirty again, hands smudged with grease, a streak of black on her cheek. She didn't care. In fact, she found she liked the weight of the tools in her hands. It felt good to do something. As they walked back toward the shelter, Corin glanced at her. You're quick. I remember patterns, she said. And you don't hesitate. I'm tired of hesitating. That night, she ate with him again, side by side, not across the table. The small things had changed. The way she leaned her elbow casually against the wood. The way he passed her a plate without looking twice. They moved around each other with a quiet rhythm now, like two instruments slowly tuning to the same key. When the lights dimmed and the software of the filtration system signaled night cycle, Corin stood and stretched. You need anything? He asked. She hesitated. Then, softly, will you stay? Just for a while. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. She didn't return to her room that night. Instead, they sat on the floor near the low heater, backs against the wall. The warmth from the coils spread through the room slowly, humming like a low lullaby. I used to be afraid of the dark, she admitted. Not because of what was in it, but because I'd be alone in it. You're not alone now, he said. She turned to him. Aren't you afraid? That I'm broken? I've never met anyone who wasn't. That stopped her. It landed in her chest and stayed there, solid and true. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. So she did. Her fingers brushed his hand, tentative. When he didn't pull away, she let hers rest gently atop his. They stayed like that for a long time. Eventually, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He shifted slightly to accommodate the weight, but didn't speak. His body was solid, warm, present. Hers trembled just a little, not from fear this time, but from release. Touch had always been a weapon in her life, or a demand, or a debt. But this was something else. Safe. She didn't fall asleep right away. Her heart wouldn't let her, but her breathing slowed, her muscles unwound. And when her eyes finally closed, her last thought wasn't about escape or survival. It was this. Maybe healing wasn't something you waited for. Maybe it was something you made, moment by moment, beside someone who didn't ask you to be less than whole. And maybe, just maybe, it started in silence and ended in touch. The mornings had become something else entirely. Not a routine, not yet, but something steady, something gently shaped by choice. Aurenia woke before Corin now, not because she had to, because she wanted to. There was a quiet stillness in the first breath of day, in the moment before the light touched the metal floors and the world outside stirred with noise. In that stillness, she could remember who she was before titles, before chains, before anyone told her what her worth should be. She wrapped herself in a simple gray tunic, the fabric light and clean against her skin, and padded barefoot down the corridor. The floor was cool, not cold. The shelter always held a quiet warmth, like the building itself was trying to protect something fragile inside. In the small kitchenette, she poured water into the kettle, added herbs she had sorted the day before, dry leaves from a packet Corin had forgotten at the back of a drawer. He didn't use them, but she liked the smell. Sharp, earthy, honest. By the time the steam rose, Corin stepped into the room. Still half-dressed, his hair tousled from sleep, a faint scar near his collarbone catching the light. "Smells better than rations," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I took liberties," she replied, pouring tea into two mismatched cups. He accepted his with a nod, still waking. They drank in silence, but it was the kind of silence that had shape to it. Comfortable, familiar. They sat by the open hatch, where the sun filtered in through the tinted panels. Outside, the dust winds were calm. The horizon stretched like a soft promise, endless, unreachable, but no longer oppressive. "Anything broken today?" she asked. Corin took a slow sip, then pointed toward the garage module. "Transport's power relays stuttering again. Want to help me yell at it?" She gave him a look. "I meant diagnose." "I know what you meant," she said and stood. "But I prefer honest machines to ones that pretend they're listening." They worked side by side under the open panel of the utility crawler. Aurenia's hands moved with more confidence now, still cautious, but no longer hesitant. She asked questions, took notes in her head, offered observations. Corin watched her, quietly impressed. "You could have been an engineer," he said. She looked at him, wiping her hands on a rag. "I was supposed to be a decorative object." "Well," he said, passing her a spanner, "this world didn't get the memo." She laughed, full and genuine. And for a moment, the air between them warmed like sunlight through cold glass. Later that afternoon, Corin brought out a weathered datapad. They sat at the table again, this time with wires stretched between them and half a screen flickering to life. Aurenia leaned in close to examine the schematic he was showing her. "This," he said, pointing, "is the base-level structure of the thermal loop. See the venting pattern here?" She nodded. "And the irregular pulse here means the unit's cooling too fast." "Exactly." She tilted her head. "Why do you keep all this to yourself?" "What?" "This knowledge. These systems. You could have taught others. Worked at the center. Build a life." He gave a small shrug. "People don't come to Dravaris 9 to build lives. They come here to disappear." Her gaze didn't waver. "Is that what you were doing?" "I thought it was," he admitted. "And now?" He hesitated, then looked at her. "I don't know anymore." She didn't speak, just placed her hand gently over his on the table. The touch wasn't urgent. It didn't ask for anything, but it said everything. She had never touched a man without fear, without expectation, without needing to measure her safety in breaths. This was the first time it felt like her choice. Corin didn't move his hand, just turned his palm slightly, allowing her fingers to settle into his. And something between them shifted again, not suddenly, not loudly, but with quiet gravity. That evening, they shared food, nothing fancy, just warm grain and preserved vegetables. But the way they sat, the way they passed things between each other, the way her hand brushed his as she reached for salt, it all carried a rhythm. They weren't filling silence anymore. They were sharing it. After the meal, Aurenia cleaned the dishes without being asked. Corin watched her move through the small kitchen like she belonged there, like she'd always belonged there. When she returned to the main room, she paused in the doorway. He was sitting on the floor, legs outstretched, back resting against the wall. The light was low now, casting warm shadows over his features. He looked tired, not from work, from life. She walked over, hesitated only for a second, then lowered herself beside him. "I didn't know what kindness was supposed to feel like," she said quietly. "I used to think it always led somewhere dark, that it was just the opening act of control." Corin turned his head slightly to look at her. "And now, I'm starting to believe it doesn't have to." He didn't speak, but his hand found hers again without asking. She leaned into his shoulder, not out of need, but because she wanted to. His breath was steady. His body was solid. And for the first time, she allowed herself to rest against someone without preparing to be hurt. Time passed. She didn't count it. There was no urgency here. No clocks ticking, no voices calling, just the quiet hum of the filtration system and the faint pulse of shared warmth. Do you ever miss who you were? She asked softly. Corin exhaled. No, but I miss what I could have been if things had gone differently. She nodded. Me too. They didn't try to solve that. They just let it be. When the shelter lights dimmed to night cycle and the last orange glow faded from the horizon, Aurenia finally stood. I'm going to bed. Corin rose with her. I'll stay here. She paused. Then, voice calm but certain, you don't have to. He watched her for a moment, reading her eyes, then followed her down the hall. Not as a man expecting anything, but as someone who had been invited. She didn't lock the door. She didn't flinch when he sat near the edge of the bed. She lay down, and, after a breath, he did too, above the covers, keeping space between them. It wasn't about closeness. It was about presence. She closed her eyes, knowing he was there, that if she reached out, he wouldn't take, that if she spoke, he'd listen, that if she fell asleep, she'd wake up safe. And in that space, in the space between them, was something stronger than touch. It was trust. And perhaps, for both of them, that was the most intimate thing of all. The sun rose slowly over Dravaris, 9, casting a pale, gold-hued light through the colony's dusty atmosphere. For the first time since arriving on this forgotten moon, Aurenia didn't feel the weight of the sky pressing down on her. The day felt still, open. Not empty, but waiting. She stood barefoot at the edge of the shelter's platform, arms folded lightly across her chest, a quiet breeze threading through her long white hair. Behind her, the soft hum of the recycler buzzed like a distant memory. Inside, Corin worked, methodical as always, fixing what was left to fix. But something was different today. They had already spoken, not with words, but with hands, with quiet meals, with the way she had fallen asleep beside him the night before, his warmth close enough to feel, but never demanding. For the first time in her life, no one had claimed her. She had claimed herself, and now she was ready to choose. She stepped back inside, the cool air of the shelter welcoming her like breath drawn deep into the lungs. Corin glanced up as she entered, his brow raised in quiet curiosity. I need to show you something, she said. He set down the tool in his hand without hesitation. Together, they climbed the slope to the old control tower on the ridge, long since abandoned. It was a place forgotten by the miners, once used to oversee shipment routes and drone coordination. Now, it held only dust, rusted consoles, and a still-working comm terminal patched together with Corin's stubborn craftsmanship. At the top, the view stretched wide. Over the colony, the fractured rock fields, and the soft flicker of the starport in the far distance. This is where they brought me when I first arrived, Aurenia said. The trader who bought me had his office here. I remember the way he looked at me, like I was a rare find, not a person. Corin didn't interrupt. He knew her silences too well by now. I thought I'd die here, she continued, and I almost did. But somehow, I found my way to the mud, and from the mud to you. He turned to face her. And now, I want to leave this place. Not because I'm afraid of it, but because it's no longer the only place I exist. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You sure? Yes. And where would you go? She turned, eyes locking with his. With you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Corin nodded once, the motion slow, resolute. Then we go. The decision was not dramatic. There were no packed bags or drawn-out goodbyes. Dravaris, 9 was not the kind of place that noticed when someone left. The crawler was repaired, fueled, and loaded with only what mattered: tools, supplies, a few crates of salvage materials, and the two of them. Corin programmed the outbound coordinates manually. Aurenia sat in the co-pilot's seat, her hands brushing over controls like a musician relearning an old instrument. As the engine warmed, she stared out at the dusty horizon. The colony, once a labyrinth of cages and silence, now looked small, insignificant, like the shell she'd finally outgrown. Ready? Corin asked. She turned to him, voice clear. Now I am. The crawler lifted off the pad with a low hum, the engines vibrating through the hull like a heartbeat. Below them, the shelter grew smaller. Then the fence lines. Then the mines. The scars in the earth faded into specks. And then they were rising toward the stars. For a while, neither spoke. The atmosphere peeled away, revealing the blackness beyond, deep, endless, free. Starlight glimmered on her skin. Corn adjusted their heading. Aurenia simply watched the planet shrink behind them, until it was just another light in the dark. Then she said, I used to dream of escaping. I'd imagine what freedom might feel like. I thought it would feel like running, like wind in my face, like distance. And now, Corn asked. She looked at him. Now it feels like standing still beside someone who won't leave. He didn't say anything, just reached for her hand. She let him take it. Fingers interlaced, steady, not desperate, not afraid, just there. She leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. Her breath came slow, calm, peaceful. She had no chains left to break, no debts to repay, no past she needed to carry anymore. What she had was this: the open stars, the hum of an engine, and a man who had never asked her to be anything but who she was. That was enough. That was everything. They had lived in stillness for so long. It felt like nature itself had rearranged itself around them. Days passed in quiet harmony, in shared tools, shared silence, shared warmth. Each moment was a thread, gently weaving something neither dared name. Until one day, it was simply there, the thing between them, the thing that had always been building. It began with a touch that lingered too long. Her hand on his back as he reached for a tool, his fingertips brushing her waist as they passed in the narrow hall. The looks lasted longer, the space between them shorter. Breath met breath more often. And then came a night she didn't retreat to her bed. The fire unit cast a low, amber glow across the room. Aurenia sat near it, long legs folded beneath her, hair spilling down her back like liquid silver. Corn was across from her, arms resting loosely over his knees, eyes steady, drawn not to her shape, but to her stillness. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him, head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Then, finally, have you ever wanted something so quietly it scared you? His throat tightened. Yes, he said. She moved then, not abruptly, but with intention, like a current that had made its decision. She crossed the room slowly, each step soft, deliberate. She stood before him, barefoot, bare-shouldered, vulnerable but sure. He didn't move. She reached for his hand and guided it to her waist. He followed, still silent, as if any sound might shatter the moment. And then she climbed into his lap, not timidly, not passively, but as someone reclaiming her body, her desires, and the right to be more than an ornament. Her thighs settled over his. Her palms cupped his face. Corn froze, not from hesitation but awe. He had never been wanted like this. Not gently, not honestly, not without expectation. Aurenia leaned in until their foreheads touched. Her voice was barely breath. I don't want you to ask if I'm sure. I won't, he said. She kissed him first. It was not soft. It was slow, yes, but not hesitant. It was searching. It was full. It tasted like need, like weeks of restraint unraveling into one honest, desperate truth. His hands slid to her back, palms splayed across the ridges of her spine, and she gasped into his mouth at the feeling of being held, not restrained. She shifted her hips against him, testing, teasing, and when she felt him respond, she let out a sound, low, soft, and full of something ancient and instinctive. Her head tipped back as he kissed her neck, then her collarbone, then the center of her chest. He tried to stay patient. She wouldn't let him. Aurenia guided his hands to her thighs, then over her hips, her body arching beneath every touch like she had been waiting a lifetime to feel this. Her skin flushed deep jade, glowing faintly with the intensity of sensation. She looked down at him from her place, astride his lap, and for a moment, she wasn't a slave, wasn't a survivor, wasn't broken. She was alive, powerful, sensual, his. When she finally took him inside her, it was slow, exquisite. She sank down with her hands braced on his chest, her mouth falling open, eyes fluttering shut. He groaned her name like a secret he'd never spoken aloud before. She moved with slow rhythm, deliberate and sinuous, guiding the pace, owning the moment. Each roll of her hips was a declaration. This is mine. You are mine. He wrapped his arms around her, as if anchoring himself to something he didn't think he deserved. She pressed her forehead to his, her breath catching every time his hands slid down to guide her deeper. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Please don't stop." And he didn't. The world around them disappeared. There was no Dravaris 9, no colony, no past, only the sweat-slicked slide of skin, the stuttering breath between them, the swell of sensation that built and built until she broke apart in his arms, crying out against his shoulder, her whole body trembling from the storm. He followed soon after, gripping her waist as if letting go might undo everything they had built. He groaned in her neck, muffled and low, the sound full of release and reverence. They stayed joined for a long time. No words, no apology for the need they'd unleashed. Only touch, fingers through hair, lips to shoulder, chest to chest, hearts pounding in harmony. Eventually, Aurenia pulled back enough to look at him. Her gold eyes were soft, her face flushed, glowing. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something profound, but she didn't need to. Corin cupped her cheek and whispered, "You're the first thing in a long time that's made me feel whole." She smiled and said, "Then I guess we saved each other." She laid her head on his chest, curled around him like gravity itself had shifted. And in the silence that followed, she felt something she never thought she'd know again. Not safety, not survival, but belonging.